Okay, folks, it's 2 o'clock, so I'm going to call the meeting to order. Thanks, everyone, for being here today. First thing we want to do is approve the minutes from the previous meeting. Okay. Second. Okay, motion passes. Is there any other additions or deletions to the agenda in front of you? Paul, I have the one that we talked about. So, Terry, okay. Anybody else? Okay. Board member comments. Any board member comments? Okay. Any comments? Sure.
Okay, I just want to make sure that the Lakes Committee understands and knows that the board has approved to go out for a second type vote for the assessment. It has changed a little bit from what it has been. It's now being proposed as $13 increase for improved properties and $0 for unimproved properties. And the ballot should be coming out like by probably tomorrow, the 12th anyway. I just encourage everyone to vote. And essentially, I ask for the yes vote because the POA needs to have it to continue to at the level that it is currently. So, is there any questions about that? I did it real short.
When does the vote have to be turned in by? When's the final date of vote?
Final is January 16th.
January 16th. Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. Appreciate that. Okay. You got anything to say, Dave? No? Okay. Okay, I'll turn it over to Rick or John or both. I saw Rick here. Both here?
I guess the big news right now for us is the Lake Ann drawdown. And after a slow start, we are playing catch up a little bit. We were supposed to be down to 6 feet by December the 5th. And at the current rate, we'll be down by December the 20th. That was due to the initial high water we had. We just couldn't keep up with what was coming in. And to kind of mitigate that a little bit, we're given another 2 weeks, so it'll be March 16th when we close the valves. So that's where we stand with that right now. We have had one trout stocking so far on Lake Brittany, and we'll get another one in the very near future. Let's see, John. Trout stocking, yes. We continue to work on flood debris cleanup as we can. The boat ramps continue to get washed up with floating material, and we have to periodically take that off. Guys are busy elsewhere, things that really don't pertain to the lakes. The dog park's getting work today, and some other areas are still seeing some cleanup. But things are kind of slow right now other than that, and we're gearing up for another busy spring. You have anything to add?
What's the impact to your budget in the coming year if the assessment does not pass?
The big thing is we would cut back pretty seriously on fish stocking. There would be no hybrid striped bass, and catfish would be cut. Catfish and trout stockings would be cut pretty substantially. We would also cut back on maintenance projects on the docks, the POA-owned docks. And the Lake Brittany has got there's a repaving of Lake Brittany, a capital project, was cut in the fail budget, which is what we're operating under. It was in the past budget. So if our assessment this time passes, then that might be something that could be reconsidered later by the board.
Okay. Appreciate it. Thanks. John, anything from you? Okay.
Did you want to talk about the fish sampling at all? I don't think we were here last time we completed it.
Our fall fish sampling is complete now. The weather kind of delayed us a little bit. First high water, and then cold weather kind of hampered our catch. We did see a young of the year saugeye, which is important because previous to this year we were just seeing the last stocking that the Arkansas Game and Fish did in 2015, but we saw a few of the fish that we stocked this past spring from our hatchery operation. So that's showing to be successful now.
Okay. Anything else?
That'll be it.
Okay, I'd like to go to Terry Gibson now. Terry has a proposal for jug line fishing. Terry, I'd ask you to be brief because we do have some other business to take care of later in the day.
My name is Terry Gibson. I live in Bella Vista, and I would like proposing the removal of the ban of free-floating device catfishing on the area lakes. The Arkansas Game and Fish Commission allow the use of jug fishing. This is an example of one. This is a homemade one. There's several different types, but it's a free-floating device. You have to put your name, your address, and also your tag number, your vehicle on it, and also Bella Vista requires that you also put your lot, your parcel number on it in case it gets away and somebody finds it and they can locate the person who owns it. But the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission allow the use of these on the lakes 24 hours a day, except during the day you have to be attending these devices while you're fishing with them. At night they can be unattended. Bella Vista rules require that you only use these at night, and they can be unattended at night, no use during the day. So I'm proposing that we remove that ban and allow us to use these devices on the area lakes. I'm a member of the Fly Tires group, and I know there's numerous people in that group that would also like to use these devices on the lakes. Also, the Fly Tires, they subsidize a lot of the catfishing, stocking in the area lakes. So the only reason that I can think of that maybe these devices aren't allowed during the day is because of recreational vehicles that are on, or boats that are on the lakes. I know there's 4 lakes that are no-wake lakes, so maybe as a compromise, these devices could be used on those lakes, since there would be slower moving boats on those lakes.
Okay.
So.
Appreciate it. I think we have to vote at this meeting to enact change for next year.
Okay.
So this is kind of late notice. So I'm gonna go to Rick and John first to see what at least initial thoughts are, and I don't know if we'll vote on that today. We'll just have to see how the discussion goes. But thank you.
Questions?
Okay. My thoughts on that are, and I appreciate the Fly Tires for all the donations they've given us in the past, and they continue to be a very good supporter of our department. But the catfishing that we have here is maintained through stocking, and at one point, Arkansas Game and Fish provided fish for us. They no longer do that. And so going forward, anything that we put in the lake has a price, whether it's paid for by volunteer groups or the POA or something. Personally, I don't like the idea of passive fishing, especially on a population that's not self-sustaining, meaning we have to stock to maintain it. It's very easy to throw out, 20, 30 hooks. You come back the next day, or like the proposal is that you stay on site and watch them. But that's my thoughts on things. I feel like that if you have a fishing line or a pole in your hand, that's active fishing, and that's what I feel like we want to promote first. If money wasn't an issue and we could stock unlimited numbers of fish that could support that kind of passive fishing, I would be for it. As far as daylight versus nighttime, I think he hit right on what the concern was, that these would get away and somehow cause interruptions with recreation. If they can be watched during the day, and maybe the idea of keeping them, even on our wake lakes, keeping them in no wake zones. They can't fish them out in the main lake, which just knowing catfish habits, I don't know that you would want to anyway. That would be something that I think could be considered. But anyway, those are my random thoughts with like 30 seconds to think about it. So.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission allowed you to use 20 of these devices per person, which I think is certainly excessive. I only use 2 or 3 of these when I go out. And during the day, they are attended. We're right there within 20 feet of these devices while we're fishing with the fishing pole. It's just an exciting thing to do. Me and my wife go out in a canoe, and we're just, deploy these and watch them, and it's just fun. Maybe if you limit the number that you can use on the lakes here to maybe 4 or 5 instead of 20, which I know is excessive. So, and on the no-wake lakes, so there's not fast-moving boats around that could hit something like this. But you're going to be near them anyway. You're going to be attending them during the day. So,
Okay.
Rick, okay, so does that mean that we have no success with spawning of catfish in our lakes?
No, not necessarily. It means that there are so many catfish farms that there is, and they are cheap, but but it wouldn't be money ahead for us to do it on our own. We can purchase them as cheap or cheaper than we can raise them.
I was just curious, do they not naturally, natural reproduction low or slow?
Well, they go through the motions and they hatch offspring, but the other established fish are heavy predators on them. And there is some natural reproduction, sure.
Yeah.
But it can't be maintained at the levels that people want without supplemental stocking. John, you were going to add?
It just said exactly.
Okay.
Okay, so, and then without an assessment increase impacting, if we have no assessment increase, you mentioned that we're going to cut back on the number of catfish. And, do we buy catfish? Have we been buying catfish on an annual basis over the last 10, 20 years?
Well, in 2015, Arkansas stopped giving us fish. And John, maybe you can answer this a little bit better than I can. I know they gave us fingerlings. Did they give us catchable size fish?
To my knowledge, I think it was all fingerlings,
Okay.
if I remember correctly, or just above fingerling size, not an actual catchable.
Okay. We've been stocking 8-inch fish, 8 to 10,
Yes.
which gets you above the level of predation
Yeah.
for most fish in the lake. So we feel like we get better survival of those.
Which was our plan this fall, because, you didn't say anything about, how's the pond looking? How's the pond with blue catfish?
We've had no change since the last meeting. We've had no flooding events since then.
But I mean, are they still feeding at the surface, do you know?
We stopped feeding when the weather got cold.
Okay. Okay, well, is this something we need to
my-
just leave on the agenda?
I would say that based upon just the knowledge that I know right now, I'm really not prepared to vote on this today, and I'd like some more time to think about this. And is anybody else, any other committee member have any comments or opinions?
I'd like to go further with feedback. I think
Right.
it's a legitimate idea. Could we limit the number of jugs that are placed? I think we could, couldn't we, Rick?
Maybe we even limit the lakes, a couple of lakes to try it out on or something, or
Yeah, and Rick said in the no-wake areas, which would be different, and then the no-wake lakes. So, it might be something that we should consider to allow it if they're under direct observation at all times.
That would allow you to fish those jugs in most any of the arms of the bigger lakes.
I guess my question would be, if we're not stocking and the procreation rate to a mature fish isn't all that great, are we starting to just take more fish, more catfish than we really ought to be taking from the lake? Or is it okay to have plenty of people out there catching their fish and having the population go down?
Well, we've kind of managed them on a put, grow, and take basis anyway. So they're put there to be fished out eventually. It's just that the rate that they could potentially be taken out when you expand the potential harvest is something to be concerned about. And to back up a little bit, as a private institution like the POA is, we can set some of our recommendations for harvest, but anything that's got the teeth of Arkansas Game and Fish, which could be enforced by game wardens, we can't set those kind of regulations. So we can't set something more restrictive than what the state deems. The only way that we can kind of get around that is to go through a municipality. So if there is a lake that's owned by the city of Fayetteville, they can dictate what regulations they want on that lake, and the state of Arkansas will adopt those. For us to do the same thing, we would have to get the city on board and have them actually make the recommendation and get the approval of the state. They won't recognize what we want to do.
Okay.
How does that fit in with our further restriction to not allow it in the daytime?
You want to jump in on that? You act like you want to say something.
I think you were covering it, but
We can say no, and we can ask that they remove their jugs, but there's no teeth behind that.
Okay.
and by the same token, the other side of what he was saying was true. So if we wanted to black bass harvest 10 per day, if we wanted to say, and you guys probably remember Daryl trying to do this several years ago, trying to have small bass, harvested in larger numbers. We can't set a harvest limit larger than the state either. To just say, hey, have a free-for-all on these small guys because we have plenty of them.
Because the fish in the lakes technically don't belong to us. They belong to Arkansas Game and Fish. No matter who put them there.
So you said that we can set restrictions how compared to the state? We can't set
We
limits
really
greater
can't.
than the state, but we can limit more restrictive than the state?
No, we can't do either. We can't do either side.
So,
But in order to get what we want, we would have to get the city of Bella Vista to adopt what
okay,
we want to
so
do.
if the state allows daytime and nighttime jug fishing, and we do not allow daytime,
Then technically technically it's already open to daytime jug fishing.
so this is a moot point.
Pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. See, Ruth has a question about what the number of hooks on a jug line.
Never having fished this way, the only way I know is to use a reel. Is there one hook on that, or is there more than one hook?
Generally, what I've seen, there's one, but there's no reason why there couldn't be more than one.
That's true. The one I have here has 2 hooks.
Has 2 hooks on it? And if you have as many as 20 for each person out doing it, and they can stay out day and night both by the state regulation?
Yep.
Sounds interesting to me.
Yeah, but they'd have harvest limits. There are limits on
There are.
how many can be
Yeah, that's
taken.
right.
How many can take out per day?
Catfish.
Seems to be-
That's correct. What's the limit on catfish, Rick? Do you know a day?
Off the top of my head, I don't know.
I can't remember on channel cats either.
Terry Gibson, do you know?
I do not.
So I think we're going to table this for now. Technically, it's, according to state rules, we can't, unless we get the city of Bella Vista involved. I don't see a whole lot that we can do in regard to your proposal. So,
Well, it's in the rule book that Bella Vista says do not use these during the day, so I'm just being here, coming here out of courtesy to see if we can remove that language from it.
and I understand, but I think,
Let's leave it on the
yeah,
agenda then.
we can leave it
for
on the
further
agenda and maybe
discussion.
approach it later next year, but it's too complicated an issue and involves too many different
To vote
outside resources and sources of knowledge to make a decision today. So we're just going to have to, I appreciate you coming in and I understand your concern. We're just going to have to table it till later in next year. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, now I'd like to talk about the draft proposal that we've developed that we'd like to send to the Board of Directors and the management team on the POA concerning wake boating. I sent a draft over to Tom and Doug McCash about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and they've provided feedback on a point-by-point basis on some of the things that we've asked or some of the things that we've proposed. And what I've done is I've taken what they've said and tried to modify our proposal to match what their recommendation or their feedback was. And so now I'd like to get into that discussion and do any committee members have any questions or concerns about the current proposal or anything you want to discuss on the document that's in front of you today, right now? Grace?
Under this document that's on our table, not one we might have previously looked at, down under signage, I see in the first point, after Loch Lomond, Windsor, and then I see 100 feet all boats, no wake, 200 wake boats. I thought we were gonna try to make it just a flat.
So that is a typo, and thanks for catching that. So my understanding of what the feedback has been is we wanted to go to 200 feet for wake boating activities, and the feedback was that that would be complicated to enforce. So the new proposal would state, and I'm sorry I didn't word that very well, but the new proposal would state that it's 200 feet if you're skiing, if you're tubing, if you're wake boating, any kind of activity that required water sports, you would be required to be 200 feet from shore. And then the 100-foot rule would apply to boats that are not involved in water sport activities. And so just to make it easy to enforce, that was some of the feedback that was provided. John and Rick, one of the things that Tom had said was that the coordinates on lake maps was something that you guys were looking into. Do y'all have an answer on that, or?
You were looking into it a little bit more than I was, but talking about something that was uploadable to a device, coordinates.
I don't know that Rodney ever got back to us on that at all. He was going to look into it, and he thought it was possible. We think it's possible.
Okay,
That's
so
the short answer. We believe
again,
it is possible.
I don't think it's going to have a major impact one way or another. I think it's something that would be nice to do. If we can get it done within the next year, I think that would be great. If not, I don't think it's going to, I mean, it's not, one of the discussions we had earlier, it's probably not a lot of boaters who are going to use it. It's probably mostly fishermen, but it would be a nice thing to have on there if we could get it done.
If I'm recalling correctly, what I think we were not too sure about is how much extra software it's going to require to kind of fold things into what we already have.
Okay. And my understanding is some of the newer depth finders and GPS units actually transmit data back to the mapping services and do mapping in real time. So I know it's gotten a lot more sophisticated in recent years. So it's pretty interesting how that works.
You can actually do that with free software in Google Earth, and then just export the coordinates, and then have those uploaded into whatever unit.
Do you know if it works with ArcMap? Is it ArcMap he's using?
I really
Is
don't
our
know.
primary software? I can't
GPS
remember.
coordinates are pretty standard, so you can convert it to any file format using GPS Babel, and it'll convert it to different file formats for different fish finders.
Our legal attorney, Dec Lakes, is here.
Yes. Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, any other comments on any other points on this proposal?
Let's talk about two things. One of them is, I don't know, let's clarify that our, what we're proposing, in other words, we're going to get ready to vote on this if we think it's the right thing to do. One of them is a clarification that this 200-foot rule would be from any, well, let's see, how do we define it? It includes the things along the shoreline, so 200 feet from the dock or 200 feet from a nearest structure. Yes, nearest structure. It's not the shoreline; it's the shoreline and the docks.
Point 4 in the top there has incorporate the new 200-foot rule from docks and shore rules based on the industry recommendation. So if
Okay.
there's a dock that's 100 feet out, it would be from the end of that dock.
Yeah, and I guess the most a dock can be out is 18 feet. And then the other thing that's significant this meeting is that we're now including, I guess as a way to clarify it, any towed, if a pontoon boat's towing a tuber, we're going to include it
And the 200-foot rule?
in the 200-foot rule.
Because technically you're tubing, you're skiing, you're waterboarding, whatever, no matter what type of boat.
That's water sport.
Right, it's a water sport activity. It should be 200 feet just for ease of enforcement and clarification.
So any discussion or feedback on that? Is that acceptable?
Well, back to the 200-foot rule. What about the underwater structure, or where it's too shallow of water to be in there? You wouldn't include that in your 200-foot, would you? Would
No.
it be from the safe boating distance? Even
Yeah,
though
well,
it could be within.
I think that anything that's that shallow would be in a no-wake zone, to my knowledge. I don't think you have anything on any of the lakes that we're talking about that would be that shallow that you could not do water sports on, that would be in an area that is not currently no wake.
I'm thinking of the Windsor on the north side where it's shallower right there.
Right.
When you start that no wake, I mean, that's not necessarily no wake, it just says that it's shallow right there.
Right.
But if you go off of the furthest dock out there, you would include that area, even though it's not the safe distance, you know what I mean?
I would not. I think that would further complicate matters. I think if you're 200 feet from shore, even in that area, or 200 feet plus the dock length from shore in that area, I think you're still in a very safe zone. I think we have to keep in mind that these guys have to enforce this, and the more complicated that we make it, it just becomes a nightmare to try to write every little.
Yeah.
I don't
know how they're going to do that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. No, I just think it's if you're 200 feet from shore on those lakes, you're in a wake zone where you can make a wake. I just don't think you're going to have an issue.
So are we talking about the boat being 200 feet from the shore?
Yes.
The tube or the tube.
Thank you. Yeah. I just think we need some language that clarifies that, because
Yeah.
we're talking about people that are wanting to get out there and get after it, and they're going to need every piece they can get, so we should be clear for that.
My recommendation would be for the boat, because the boat is the vehicle, for
I
lack of a
actually
better
agree
term,
with that. I
making
think
the wake or making the bigger splash or the bigger wake. So
Matt, to your point, I think we need to keep it simple, right? And not add any more strings or complications to it than absolutely necessary, because we've got rangers that are going to have to process all this stuff and make decisions on the fly.
if you don't do the wake, if you don't do the boat or the vehicle, then if somebody has an 80-foot ski rope versus again, you're just getting to something that's just impossible to manage.
I have another comment.
Go ahead, Greg.
We had talked before the meeting, up under new rules, the third bullet down, you wrote in there, as an alternative, Rick and John will call a meeting of all wake boat owners to go over the rules. And am I right in assuming that if there's no assessment increase, we'll not be in a position to afford to do a video? Or will we have the funds or time and people to do a video explaining why it's important to have these 200-foot rules? Because we'd wanted to get all the wake boat people up to speed on
Right.
what those are.
That shouldn't matter either way. We would just have to work with marketing and communications to get something made and get it out there.
Is there a commercially available video that we could?
I bet there is.
That we could, instead of having to go produce one, since we're
water
not in a movie-making business?
The Water Sports Industry Association offers some videos, but they're directed towards good behavior, and I don't know that they have the 200-foot rule, so it's got to be mixing.
Okay.
But we could use them as a template.
Right. And I think I left both comments, both recommendations in there. Obviously, the video would be a more complete, more involved rule for the member. But again, if there's not a good video or we don't have the resources to make one, then as a follow-up, I think John and Rick having face-to-face meetings with boat owners can also be very impactful. And I don't know if we can require them to attend those meetings, but, maybe in order to get your sticker, they're required to attend a face-to-face if the video option does not work. And that's why I left them both in there.
And the other piece of that is having them sign a form verifying that they've received the information or seen your presentation or seen the video. I think my personal opinion is that they need to acknowledge it and sign that they've been informed.
Doug, is that something that we could require?
Yes, yeah, you could do that.
Okay. So we can leave the language about signing, having the member sign to say they had received the materials and were instructed on proper procedures and what have you. Good. Thanks, Doug.
We'll have a comment about, many of these things are just fine, but something we are eventually going to have to deal with is the number of these boats, the number of recreational vehicles, boating vehicles that are on the lake simultaneously, seems to me they would cause all kinds of difficulties if we don't have some way to regulate that.
I would agree.
Is the number, does anyone else concerned about the number of boats that are on the lake at any one time? Rick or John?
I think we had residents that were very concerned about that.
The number of wake boats that are operational on any given day.
So said another way, Doug, back to you, could the rules state that if there were, and I don't know what the correct number was, but I'm thinking 2 or 3, if could we state somewhere in there that if you went out to wake boat and there were already 2 to 3 boats out there skiing or doing water sports, that you'd have to kind of wait your turn? Is there something that we can do to limit that from a legal perspective?
Yeah, that'd be a lot more difficult to justify a rule that way. I feel like what you guys have put together so far, all the research that you've done, and the recommendations that you've come up with show that you've put a lot of time and effort into that, and I appreciate that. Something that would be a little bit more, I think, subjective and harder to justify a rule like that.
Okay. Again,
Well,
we're asking them to operate within a safe distance, and maybe the 200-foot, the 200-foot rule, maybe we could require 200 feet from another boat also. And so if you do the math, if you get more than 2 boats or 3 boats out there, you can't physically get 200 feet between the boats. I don't know. Just an idea.
So in general, what we're saying is that we really don't have an issue with the number of boats on the lake at any particular point in time.
It's an issue, certainly at certain times of the year.
Like on the 4th of July.
On the 4th of July is a major issue, and what we've done to this point is just increase enforcement on those days, put guys out on the water to just referee whenever, situations like that exist. And it's not just the wake boaters on those days, it's everybody just wants to be on the lake at that point.
Let's acknowledge the fact that in our discussions about limiting large wake activities, that we've recognized that, do we need to limit the size of boats? Or now we're discussing about the quantity of boats on the lake at any given time? So I know, I guess I recognize it as an issue that is a little more complicated than dealing with this, but it is, as Bella Vista grows and gets more residents, it could become an issue that we want to try to tackle by limiting the size or some other way to measure that.
I think we need to keep that in mind, but again, we're asking these guys we're trying to put forth something that can be enforceable. This document may be totally outdated in a year from now or 2 years from now as we get more boats or more issues or more whatever or less. I would admit that Bella Vista Lakes are not the perfect lake to go wakeboarding on. And so I think by putting the additional requirements and recommendations in place and 200-foot rules and such things such as this, I don't necessarily want to prohibit anybody from doing it, but at the same time, I'm not out there, saying, hey, we're Bella Vista, come wake boat in Bella Vista. I don't think that's the message we want to send either. We're trying to reach a compromise here to keep everybody, there's no such thing as a perfect solution. I realize that, but again, in 5 years or 3 years or 2 years, if we get 50 people with wake boats, is that going to become a bigger issue? Obviously, yes.
Well, in my opinion, this is a good first step forward.
That's what this is. It's a first step attempt. It's an attempt at a first step to get us to next year. And again, we're in a constant lab environment as things progress throughout the months and the years ahead. Obviously, we're going to monitor. We're going to meet. We're going to get feedback. We're going to, we're not just going to walk away with our eyes closed.
Matt, I was going to say, I think, in response to Rick, I think we have acknowledged that, there are rules that exist, right? That if enforceable, if the world was a perfect place, we wouldn't have this problem. But we have people that are on the water and want to have fun, and they kind of forget about that. That's not true for everybody, but I think we spent the whole last year, we argued that, right? We did this initial project to come up with this stuff, or a proposal, and it was that we just needed more enforcement, so we increased our rangers. So I think we have acknowledged that there are things in place that handle 100% of these problems. What we're doing here is we're taking it further, because in spite of the fact that we're doing our best effort to try to police these things, it still falls short because people get on the lake and they want to have fun. That's the best I can do, right? And so I'm a guy, I can be guilty myself. Yeah? I mean, it's summertime and it's fun. So I guess all I'm saying is I don't know that we need to complicate it more for these guys, but to the point of this whole effort here is trying to find the balance, right? So that we can have people have fun and be safe, right? Without restricting things to the point where we start damaging property values or, other bad things. And so I think it's a great point, but the whole process that we've been through over the last couple of years does illustrate that, we're trying to do the right things. We have acknowledged many things, and they're not adding up quite to the piece that we want. So I think it's going to be a continual thing, and as more technology comes around, more boats come around, you're going to have to respond. You're going to have to react.
Yes, sir.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
The distance restrictions that you're proposing to establish. Name's Errol Wasson. I live on Lake Windsor. The distance restrictions you're proposing, do they have anything to do with kayakers, paddleboarders, swimmers, or if they're out 50 feet, they're just now closer to the wake boat?
You talking about if the paddle boarders are out?
Yeah, kayaker, paddleboard, swimmer, if they're out past the distance from the dock, do these distances have any impact on them? Or are we still 200 foot from the...
I think to keep things simple, it's 200 feet
Okay.
would be my response.
So if you're out away
I'm not sure
from a
I
kayak
understand what
or
you're asking.
paddleboard, you're just closer.
I'd go back to the same comment I just made. Just talked a lot about this, and that is there are rules in place that do not give a wakeboarder or any other kind of boat the right to go by that paddleboarder full speed. It's to consider all the things out there and be safe. That's what our rules do today. So it's not just the distance. There's many factors. It's enforcement, and it's people knowing the rules and abiding by them.
Yeah, because what if a bass boat goes by in the wake section?
right.
To me, if you're on a kayak or you're on a paddleboard, pick your times to be out there. You have no wake lakes to go do that on, and if you have plenty of areas in the big lakes that have.
So kayakers are supposed to take their boats to no wake lakes.
No, kayakers.
And swimmers are supposed to go to the beach on Avalon and not swim.
Well, I mean,
in our other lakes. Okay.
I don't think
that's
anybody's
fine.
out there wakeboarding right now.
We beat this to death. You guys have beat this to death. And a lot of us from the lakes have tried and tried and tried. And this is, if you thought this hit the middle, it didn't even come close. I know that you did the test last month. I was out of town and couldn't be here. I watched the video. I'm not saying it wasn't a valid test, but I'm sure telling you it's not what we normally experience when wake boats are out on the lake. We experience a lot larger wakes coming into the shoreline than you got on the video. Can't tell you why, don't know why, but 9 inches is not what we see when we're on the lake in the summer when the wake boats are out. So I guess our only answer is if we see a wake coming in bigger than 9 inches, we just call the ranger and say they must have been too close. So, but anyway, this is not a middle of the road solution. This is completely leaning towards the wake boat owners. But thank you for your consideration and your time.
I appreciate your comments, sir. Yes, sir.
If y'all don't recognize me, I'm from Tyree Raceway. your rules and recommendations, by and large, I appreciate the good work and input y'all have had. I do take exception to, down at the bottom of it, under the signage, that you're allowing boats other than wake boats, as I read it, within 100 foot of a dock. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That's not good, guys. That's not good at all. That defeats everything we've talked about.
If you're doing water sports
The
activities.
way I read it is that your wake boats have to stay 200 foot out, which is good. I can live with that.
If you're doing water sports activities, wakeboarding, skiing, tubing, it's 200-foot rule. If you're just in a pontoon boat, bass boat, whatever, any other kind of boat,
You can come
it's
within 100 foot of my
100
dock.
feet.
You just will send the wake boats by. Those pontoon boats will make just a slow running, high outboard pontoon boat will make almost as much wake as a wake boat will sitting on my dock. I would appreciate it if y'all would take under consideration, and I could live with a 200-foot, no wake within structure or shoreline for any boat. And you debated against docks going in and out, but in reality, when you're going down that channel, and if everybody knows you got a 200-foot setback, and y'all were talking about setting a buoy out there from your boat landing to give you a gauge of what that distance is, your line of sight is, and I'm not the only one that has a dock that sticks out 40 foot in the water, and that means 60 foot out, a pontoon boat can come by, make a wake. You understand what I'm saying? So what I would like to see is y'all amend that and just make it 200 foot. You already got 200 foot in there for wake, but for any boat of any motorized vessel within the structure and the shoreline. The other thing I'd like to throw out there, it's not a problem now, but we probably didn't foresee problems 10 or 15 years ago, is there's no regulation on operation of, in a 24-hour period, operation of vessels out on the lake. I have no problem with fishermen, but that's not to say that somebody in the near future couldn't get out there and run a boat up and down the lake at 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night, 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. I'm just saying there ought to be something in your regulation to back that up. There's no regulation saying how big a boat I can put on that lake, how big a motor I can put on that lake. I think that's something that y'all need to address and put in your regulation. With that, thank you.
Thanks for your comments, sir. Any other comments?
I'll just
Go
go
ahead.
on record. I thought this meant it would mean 200 feet for all motorized craft that can create a wake. I didn't realize that we were delineating pontoon boats as not being involved in that 200-foot rules, but, you know.
My
like
opinion
your
on
other
that is that
comments.
we already have very restrictive areas for boats to go above no idle speed. You have no wake zones on all of these lakes, and they're pretty big, honestly. And I would say that why penalize the fishermen and the pontoon boat owners and operators? We're trying to accommodate the water sports folks. Why we haven't had an issue with boats per se on a large scale. So my opinion is you leave the current rules in place for boaters, because we're really talking about a wake boat issue. We're really talking about wake boating. And the recommendation from Tom and Doug was that if you're including water sports, if you're including wakeboarding, then it ought to be including water skiing, tubing, anybody pulling a tuber or what have you. A boat not pulling anybody operates in a totally different environment. There's nobody behind them. They're not making wide turns with somebody swinging out. Just a whole different set of scenarios there, in my opinion.
So perhaps to make sure it's absolutely clear in this document, maybe we should put something in that said, it's still the 100-foot rule for these kinds of craft. So
And
there's
I would
no
agree,
confusion.
I would agree with you 100% on that.
Okay.
If there's no further discussion, I make a motion that the Lakes JAC recognize this draft proposal and offer it to the POA board as new rules.
Second.
Second. Any, all in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. Any other comments on any other topics from the audience? Anybody else have anything to say?
10 catfish per day per person.
Is the state rule?
Yes.
State rule,
They
okay.
can't eat it, they can't keep it.
All right, well, appreciate you looking that up for us.
Never exceeds.
When is the next board meeting, Ruth?
Work session is tomorrow, the next board meeting is a week from tomorrow.
So I have to do a couple of typos on here, and I'll have it to you guys tomorrow. When is the work session?
9 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Okay, I'll do it,
We'll make that an addition to the board.
And then do you need a briefing at the board meeting on the 19th?
Yes, yeah. We will have, if you bring it to us tomorrow to present, and we discuss it, and then somebody will have to come back and
so your board meetings, and the only thing I have to change is clarify some of the language. That's the only thing that's going to change.
tomorrow morning it's 9 o'clock, and then the regular board meeting is at 6 o'clock on
Okay,
the day next Thursday.
all
The
right.
19th, I think. So do you want me to cover that?
Sure.
19th?
Yeah, the 19th.
We may want to have a couple people come in and answer questions.
Just one clarification.
Okay.
What Ms. Turley was talking about. Requiring members registering wake boats to watch the video.
Mhm.
And if you're going to make 200-foot rule for water sports, does the ski boat not have to watch the video, but the wake boat does?
Yeah, it's a good question.
I'd ask Doug.
Doug?
I would prefer that everyone sign an acknowledgement saying that they watched it because of this
Yes.
restriction. You can't discriminate between wake boaters and say you have to watch it, but others who are under the same restriction don't have to. If you're under that restriction, you would have to watch or acknowledge that you had that
Okay.
discussion.
Okay.
Just for discussion purposes, the reason that was kind of added in there, the video, mainly has to do with the wedge on wake boats, operating them the correct way versus a ski boat. You know, you're sending wake in both directions equally. But, we found that real difference with the wedge on a wake boat, and that was kind of the spirit of why we wanted to educate people about the wake boat.
Yeah.
So I didn't catch, Doug, did you say, okay, so if we're gonna go to 200 feet and then we're gonna make and we said, we were really differentiating the wake boat operators because they were boats that had additional ballast or other devices that would create large wakes. In other words, it was their intention to make a large wake, typically for surfing, because when they're wakeboarding, their wake is not as big. We know from the science, from the WSIA study. So do we need to, I didn't quite follow that. So as we attempt to try to define wakeboard operations that create the biggest waves with additional ballast and other devices on board, which I know you've kind of clarified that, that's who we wanted to go through for the video.
Right.
We're trying to let them understand that they still have additional rules. They have to throw their wake to the center of the lake. Is that the only other rule that they have?
Well, in operating the wedge that John just said, I mean, there's several things specific to wake boats that we were trying to get them to watch the video. And to me, I don't know, are we watering down, if you require everybody to watch the video, which in and of itself is not a bad idea, but how do you, then you're going to have to differentiate boat registrations. Do you plan to pull a skier? Do you plan to pull a tuber? I mean, you're adding a lot of complexity.
So can we stick with the video going to those people with?
Yeah, give me a little bit of time to look at it again.
Okay.
I'll look at it this afternoon
Okay.
and give you my recommendation, Matt, when you,
Yeah.
when you forward it over.
Yeah, because it becomes those boats that are adding additional ballast or devices with the intention of making large wakes, which currently tends to be just surfing. Because if they wakeboard, they're going almost 18 miles an hour versus 8 or 9 miles an hour. So, okay, consider that.
So how does that address the skiers and the tubers? Are they capable of making a big enough wake to create problems along the shore and along the docks? I think we just need to ask ourselves that question. And if the question is no, they can't create that much of a wake, then maybe they shouldn't be included in this. But if they do create problems with a larger wake, then they need to be included in this.
Again, I think we're trying to address the issue of specifically wake boats
I know.
on this proposal.
I think Grace is right.
But
And, I mean, you have the language in there for skiing and tubing and so on, which is
Right.
recreational
okay,
boating. And if they do create a problem in terms of the size of their wake, then keep them in here, even though we're emphasizing the wake boats. And
and when you say
those-
keep them in there, require them to watch.
in this proposal.
Okay.
200
Requiring
feet.
them to be 200 feet away. And then it becomes, how do we, if we believe that they are capable of making a larger wake that creates problems, okay, we have to say yes or no to that question. And if we're saying yes, they're capable, then the question becomes, how do we figure out how to register them, or at least get them to watch the training video when they register their craft?
I understand your point. I just, again, we're trying to get something done so that the board can enact 2020
Okay, but
rules.
let's go
I know.
back. If we were
I
go
mean,
back to just
we can evolve as time goes on. I just don't think you can make a perfect proposal. I mean, if we,
but we were close
time is
last
of the essence,
meeting.
folks.
Yeah, we've had separate meetings on this, and we thought we were pretty good, but then I hear what you have to say, Mr. Lawyer, and it makes sense that we can't necessarily ask.
I mean, we haven't, I guess my point is, we haven't had big complaints from John and the rangers who have visited us.
Yep.
Water skiing has not been a big issue today. So
let's
we're
leave it
addressing an issue on wakeboarding. If water skiing or tubing or some of these other activities become an issue, then I would say we can address those when they become an issue. But
We're going to put those wake and ballast boats in a separate class because we're going to give them a different sticker.
We
I
are.
think we just do it for that group.
right.
A
Yeah.
big reason for the 200-foot rule, and including everybody that's going to tow a skier, and that is just an enforcement thing. A lake ranger is going to pull up to a scene where we've just had a complaint and going to look and see, okay, that guy is towing a skier. You shouldn't be in this zone. You should be out here in this zone, regardless of the activity.
Right.
Also, although we don't know this for a fact, but we have long suspected that some of the reports that we've gotten as wake boat activities have actually been ski boat activities, because we get there and there's no ski boat or there's no wake boat there, and it's, I suppose it is plausible. I don't know, we haven't tested it, but it's plausible that you could get a good sized wake off of a ski boat if they were turning or doing some other type of activity.
Or a bass boat, or a pontoon boat.
Right.
And at risk of speaking for Carmen in member services, I can hear her gasp at the thought of having everybody with a large motor watch a video and create a line in her office. So that's something to consider as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, all valid points. It's just, you know, we have to, at the end of the day, we have to come with something.
Since you're walking that in, Doug, if they walk that into the board tomorrow and we vote to move it to the board meeting, and that will be announced or be put on the agenda for the board meeting, is that enough notice to the public? Because they have talked about this, and this has been an issue with the committee for almost a year now, and they've talked about each and every time they said they was going to bring it up. So is that enough notice, or will we have to, is there a good chance we'd have to table it until January, until the public has a chance?
Technically, it's enough notice, but I don't know that that's the right thing to do with this big of an issue. I think it would be wise to provide more notice than just 1
So if we
week.
tabled it and got it to the January meeting, we're still ahead of the boat registration masses or groups for next year. So it's not like we're waiting until April to do it. If we did it in January, we'd still be in good shape. Is that correct, guys? Correct. Because I would be concerned about that. It's, you know, everybody knows you're talking about this, and anybody interested in it should be aware of what you're doing by now. But the fact that we walk it in, that gives 1 week, and it's not on tomorrow's agenda, so people won't be looking for it. So it causes a definite problem for the board. And so I would guess, in my estimation, I would guess we table it until January to actually vote on it, to give membership input.
The only issue I see is, you know, we're requiring wake boats to have that extra sticker. And so if somebody technically registered a boat in January, then you might miss that.
But they're going to be such a small number that
They are.
they're going to be subcategorized into their own group, and we can make contact with them before the warm season.
Okay.
And they can be told that this is in the works.
Right.
They will see when it's in the issue. But that would be my guess. Is that fairly accurate, Doug?
Yeah, we could contact them later.
I just would hate like Texas, have you walk it in, and then we get a big uproar because we didn't give notice, even though we've talked about it now for
Okay.
quite a while.
Fair enough. All right, anything else?
Hey, I have one question. I don't know if this has been thought through, but assuming the 2020 plan passes, which lowers the registration fees of boats, how would that work if a guy registers a boat in January and pays the higher fee?
Anything paid for that has time left on it when the actual date it goes into effect will be prorated, and they would get the credit back. I think if it's more than $10, they're talking about writing a check.
Yeah, $10 to get actual refund amount.
And if it's
Less than 10 would be a credit on your.
But say you register a boat and it goes down $200, and it's 3 months or whatever the case may be, it'd be $130, $200 you get back.
Okay.
So don't register your boats till January the
So I
16th.
encourage you to go ahead and register, because that is an issue. That if everybody waits till the very last minute, then everybody does everything at the same time.
Correct.
That's why we want to get out.
It goes
to
into
the-
effect in March if it passes,
Yeah,
is that
it'll
correct?
go March 1st if it passes, and we want people to go ahead and register. You will get the money back. It will be a check.
Okay.
Any difference
Okay.
of anything that has value on it left.
Thank you.
All right.
Bigger than $10.
That being said, meeting adjourned.